Hi,
Hello and welcome to.
the Future of Politics podcast.
So this is an A-level AQA revision podcast for politics.
And it's the AQA exam board.
In today's first episode...
Oh, wait.
Okay.
We'll eventually be covering. So, like, UK Constitution.
Oh, yeah.
UK government and politics.
Yeah.
US government and politics. And then...
Political ideologies.
Yeah,
They're the three papers. So in today's episode, we'll be covering the history, sources and principles of the British Constitution and also...
the the participation and franchise.
So to start off, we'll probably just be covering a lot of like key terms, knowing stuff. We'll tell you like what you should be revising, a lot of the stuff, like the first 4 key term type things you'll need to just remember. It's not you don't really need to write them down, they're quite simple. But then if you'd like the historical documents, we recommend you revise like 3 or 4. We'll tell you like the most important ones when we get to them.
Yeah. So, to start us off, a constitution is a body of laws, rules and practices that lay out how the state is organised.
So then, obviously, we have like a democratic system.
Yeah.
And that's when the government is chosen by the people through elections.
And then, continuing on for constitutions, a codified constitution is when everything's in one single authoritative document that clearly like stipulates all that's needed to understand how the country is run.
Which is like America's constitution. Like they have like the 5th Amendment, right to bear arms, that's in their constitution. It's all on one piece of paper. It's like the Declaration of Independence. I feel like that's part of it. I'm not sure, we've obviously...
Yeah, we've not looked at that yet.
However, we, as England, have a codified an uncodified constitution where there's like no single source for our constitutional framework. It's like all fragmented over the place because obviously we've got a very rich history, complex history, and it's never really needed to be all in one place.
Yeah. It might, in like textbooks and stuff, they sometimes say unwritten, but that's a lie. It is written, it's just not in one place. So, moving on to like the sources of the constitution.
Yeah, historical sources.
So we'll start off with the Anglo-Saxons, Saxons, who introduced trial by jury and the Witten Council, which was like a group of people to advise the king. And then they also did the habeas corpus, which was the right to appeal against illegal imprisonment.
Although it probably would have been quite difficult
to
be like, oh, well, I'm being imprisoned illegally. They're like, no, you haven't.
Yeah, literally.
But it was a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And expanding on trial by jury, that's what we have now, which is when, like, you have a group of people who, like, decide, basically, whether you're guilty or innocent. Yeah. And it was, like, it was the first sign of secularisation, like, moving away from religious, because they used to do trial by... whatever it was, trial by God or whatever.
Yeah, there used to be trial by combat, but then there was also the ones where it was like, you know, you get dunked into water.
Yeah, during like witchcraft times.
Anyway, then we've got the Norman conquest, or like feudalism. So that introduced obviously the feudal system, where like the monarch owned all of the land, and everyone, like peasants, knights, nobles, they all had to like swear an oath of loyalty towards the king, and this started to establish like the delegation of power to like a chief minister and all of his nobles, to like help again like advise the king on stuff, which is like the earliest forms of like parliament or like a prime minister.
Yeah. And then the Magna Carta, which is really important. You need to know like the basics of this and like kind of in depth. But it limited the monarch's power, and the monarch couldn't raise tax without like the people's permission, basically. And
if no one's gonna give permission to raise tax.
Exactly. And if you've ever watched the Disney film like Robin Hood, then that's kind of what it's based on, when like everybody was being taxed so much for like wars. It also made it so that trial by jury was guaranteed, and justice is free and fair for everyone.
That's what you need to revise.
Yeah. Then the Acts of Supremacy in 1534, the first one.
This is obviously during Henry VIII's like reign, and he obviously became head of church. So he gained all authority over like spiritual, religious needs, like things, and temporal, which is like all over the state. And the second act of supremacy, which was in 1558, it basically re-established absolute authority. So he moved away from like Magna Carta because Henry VIII was a bit of a tyrant.
Yeah.
And he wanted all of the power he could get.
Yeah. Then there's the English Civil War, which is really important because it was the only time in like UK history where the monarch wasn't in power and everything was in Parliament's hands, because Parliament revolted against King Charles and killed him and established a republic under Oliver Cromwell.
Obviously, if you've ever watched Horrible Histories, the very catchy song of Charles II, you'll learn
Charles
everything. Yeah, they killed Charles I and Charles II was his son.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
they like re-established the monarchy, restored the monarchy even. That one, revise, it's quite easy.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's the English Civil War. Glorious Revolution and Bill of Rights is another one to revise. It's basically when William of Orange refused to return to absolute authority. So Charles II did, but then William of Orange didn't want to. So he created a contract between himself, the monarch, and like the people of the state. And he also introduced the Bill of Rights, which removed royal interference in elections, obviously, because by this point they have Parliament, they have like a Prime Minister. It also limited royal prerogative and established parliamentary sovereignty, both of which we'll cover a little bit later, those key terms.
Yeah. And then you've got the Act of Settlement, which is when William III and Anne had no heirs, and the heir needed to be a Protestant. So George I was made king by Parliament, which is like where the monarchy kind of like moved from one family to another.
Yeah.
Because it was not like biological, basically.
Kind of became elected, really.
Yeah.
Not particularly, but sort of.
Not democratically.
Then we had the Act of Union, which like unified the governments of Scotland and England to Westminster. So before that, there was like a King of Scotland and a King of England, but then they all just became one.
Yeah.
We unionised.
And then these are really important, the Parliament Acts. So the first one was in 1911, and that it made it so that the House of Lords couldn't veto and only could delay a bill by 2 years. And it also gave all financial power to the Houses of Commons. So they were the only people who could make decisions on that. And then the Second Parliament Act in 1945 reduced
49.
Oh yeah, 1949. Reduced it by a further year, so they could only delay. So the House of Lords could only delay the bill by 1 year rather than 2,
which obviously still stands now.
Yeah.
So again, moving on to some more key terms, it's very key term heavy this side. Statutes. So this is the highest form of like law, and it's basically acts of parliament passed by both houses and then receive royal assent, which is where like the king or the monarch in general signs it off. And it's, like I mentioned, the most important sources because it's the laws and policies that impact the people.
Yeah. I just keep saying yeah.
Yeah, you're my yes man.
Then common law is bodies of legal rulings made by senior judges, but once they've made it, all other judges have to follow that in similar circumstances. So like the Uber thing where they were on like bad contracts where they couldn't work for anybody else, but they also didn't have a minimum wage, they couldn't go on breaks. They fought that under a judge. It was like kind of part of collective rights, and now they can like.
So now gig economy's kind of been banned in the UK because of it. And if you work for like Uber or Just Eat, you kind of have to be employed by them as a driver rather than being like, oh yeah, you can just kind of pick up, take whenever.
Yeah.
And then royal prerogative, like I mentioned a little bit before, is what little remaining power the monarch has. So they can prorogue Parliament, which is where like they disband Parliament. However, the Prime Minister kind of can exercise this. Well, not really. Like Boris Johnson did it over Brexit, but he kind of asked the Queen, "Oh, can I just disband Parliament or prorogue Parliament for a little bit?" And then he did it to try and get Brexit through, which was deemed like unconstitutional because you really can't do that because obviously if there's no one in Parliament, people can't like vote against what you're trying to get through. So it was a bit scummy of him, for lack of better words.
And then conventions are practices that have become the norm over time. So they're not written down like anywhere, but they're universally agreed, or like they're agreed in Britain, to allow Parliament to like properly function and function effectively.
So authoritative works are like long established political texts that are like about the constitution, so they comprise all of the fragmented documents of the uncodified constitution. So a really good example of this is
the English Constitution by Walter like Badger or something, or
like Bodger, something
like
similar
that.
to Badger. It's confusing, I guess.
And then there's EU law, which used to take precedent over statutes, but now, because obviously we've left the EU, they're worthless now. And it was legislation passed by European Parliament, and as I said, it takes precedent over statutes. So one really good example of this is the Merchant Shipping Act in 1988, which was when the UK didn't want foreign like countries to fish in like the English Channel. So they made a law against it, but then the EU was like, no, you have to let them fish there.
Which is why a lot of like small fishing towns that relied on fishing like historically were very heavy on Brexit. Like they wanted Brexit because they wanted their power over the water, but obviously we didn't get like a hard Brexit. So I think we're still kind of in agreement with the Merchant Shipping Act. But a big question to ask now is, should we codify our constitution? Like, would it be beneficial to codify our constitution? Because a lot of people think it's needed after like a big change, like something massive has gone on, like Brexit. So we're here to argue both sides.
So one reason would be, if there's a big change, it's easier to understand if it's all in one place. Like, it's just there. It's easy to change as well. Like,
no, it's actually harder to change.
Oh.
Because when it's all in one place, you have to go through like so many loopholes to change your constitution, whereas because it's our constitution is fragmented, it's all over the place, no one's gonna like compile it and go, well, we already had a law on this and we need to stick with it. Like, you can just make a new law that covers the same topic, whereas if it's in your constitution, you've got to like remove it from the constitution and then add something back in, which obviously I don't particularly know the ins and outs of it, but it's more difficult than if we had a uncodified constitution.
But like, another argument to codify it is that like Britain's already very much like not interested in politics, and having it all in one place, it like just gives a lot of clarity to citizens, and it's also much easier to access than like multiple different sources. So it's like, it's easy to clarify what you mean.
Although, obviously, we have a very complex history, so, you know, we just covered a few of the main points in our, like, political history, but that obviously wouldn't really be, like, representative or, like, reflected in, like, in a codified constitution. And even if we did codify it, it would still bring issues. Like, it wouldn't get rid of all of the issues that we have with, like, passing statutes and stuff like that. And because it's uncodified, it allows more flexibility with laws and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, moving on to some key terms.
So these are the principles of our constitution.
Yeah. So we've got, first off, parliamentary sovereignty, which is really important to understand. And it's like, Parliament holds all the legislative power in the, like, Britain, UK. And no institution is more powerful. I know you might, like, a lot of people think the monarch has precedence over Parliament, but it doesn't. Like, Parliament is the most important, like, thing. It means they can also legislate on anything.
And nothing's more powerful, like, or can overturn it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was the case with EU law that did take precedence, but that's because we consented or, like, opted into it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it doesn't take precedence over anymore.
It also means that any new government can't be stopped from pursuing its agenda.
Like its manifesto.
Yeah, so the Salisbury Convention is really important to know. It's when the House of Lords can't block a bill from the government's manifesto. So, like, if they said, we want to put £300 million into the NHS or whatever, the House of Lords can't be like, no, you can't do that, because if it's in their manifesto,
that's what they've got voted in to do, so you've got to let them do it.
Yeah.
And following on with the monarchy argument, we have a constitutional monarchy, which is basically that we have the illusion that the monarch remains in power, or like still has some power, but there's actually like they don't have any power aside from the little power they have with like proroguing Parliament. But the Prime Minister has to ask, and like with receiving royal assent, they don't really tend to say no, because the Prime Minister kind of, in quotation marks, knows what's best, and the head of state is really only there for ceremonial reasons now.
Yeah. Then we've got the rule of law, which means that laws apply to every individual equally. There's no like loopholes or going over it. Even if you're in Parliament, you can't just avoid the law, because so another like an example of that is, it also protects citizens against abuses of authority, like the Uber case where they were like on awful contracts. There are 3 aspects to the rule of law, which is a free and fair trial, no one is above the law, and the rights of citizens need protecting under common law.
So like no one is above the law, like the Prime Minister isn't above the law, the monarch isn't above the law, like everyone can face the law, which is actually interesting because the Supreme Court was part of Parliament at one point. It was part of the House of Lords, but then it like got split off, which means it's even easier for people to like not avoid the law, basically. Similar to the Act of Union, which I mentioned before, we have a unitary state, which is like multiple nations in a country, so Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We all have one main body for decision making, or like legislative power, which is Westminster. Although America is like a federal state, because it disperses its power across the regions, or like its states. But because we're having devolution, which is where Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland all have their own like mini parliaments where they can talk about their own local issues. Like, you know, we have Mayor of Manchester, Mayor of London. That's another example of devolution. So we're becoming more like quasi-federal, which is like half federal, half not.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you do psychology, it's a quasi-experiment, so you'll kind of understand that.
Then we're moving on to franchise.
Yeah, franchise, a little cut off. Franchise.
So franchise is who has the ability to vote, and currently in specifically England, it's you have to be 18 plus, not in prison and mentally able. But the thing with the not in prison is that it's actually illegal for us to do that under the European Conventions of Human Rights, and we have to pay out like loads of fines. But as David Cameron put it, he would rather I don't know what he said, I think he was like, I would rather die than let prisoners vote.
Which is a bit stupid, because Scotland, they have the policy where if you are currently serving less than 12 months, or you have 12 months left on your sentence, and there's an election coming up within those 12 months, you can vote in it, because that's going to affect you very soon. They
also let 16 to 17 year olds vote.
So we've got a few questions like, should we let 16 to 17 year olds vote? Should we allow prisoners to vote? And, you know, if you think we should allow prisoners to vote, where's the cut-off? You know, could someone serving 15 years vote in the next election in 2 months? It's up to you to have a little think about that.
And then we've got Reform Acts. So the Great Reform Act, or the Representation of the People Act of 1832, it went about correcting the abuses that were common, such as like rich aristocrats controlling boroughs, and like 11 MPs were like elected by one person, so it was not like democratic at all. It wasn't it wasn't a representation of the people.
It was very much biased, especially towards the Conservative Party, as they've always been in favour of rich people. So if you're only allowing rich people to vote, I wonder who's going to get elected.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously that happened in 1832, but in 1867 there was the Second Reform Act, where it extended the right to vote not only to like large owning men, but to like urban working class men who owned a house. So you didn't have to own land, you just had to own a property.
But it still remained only men.
Yeah, and you still had to own property. Like if you rented, you couldn't.
Yeah. Then in 1884, the Third Reform Act extended to like the franchise to more counties, like homeowners. And
You still had to be a homeowner and
Yeah.
a man, but it just extended to more counties because I assume it was very much based, if you live near London or like down south.
Yeah.
So I guess they extended it to a bit more to be inclusive of like the north of England.
Yeah.
And then in 1918, which we know is the suffragettes and the suffragist movement, it allowed all men over 21, no matter of class, and all women over 30.
And it would have been after First World War as well.
Yeah.
Like the Women at Work campaign.
Yeah, women in work.
But it was still only women over 30. It still wasn't equal for the men and women. Then in 1928, it was made for everyone over 21. You didn't have to have a certain amount of money, you didn't have to own a house, you didn't have to own land, and it was men and women, so it was everyone over 21.
And then, as we know it today, in 1969, everyone over 18 was granted the right to vote, which obviously
Wait,
still stands today.
it might be due to the, what they called, the party.
Oh, yes, the raving, loony,
The monster
raving loony party.
Yeah, something like that.
Because the leader was part of the teenagers party, and they were campaigning for 18-year-olds to be allowed the right to vote. Although they never got elected, it's very... Their policies got stolen by the bigger parties, basically.
Like, they were very adamant about, you need to let 18-year-olds vote because they can go to war, they can, like, pay taxes and stuff, so why aren't they voting?
Yeah.
But moving on to participation. So participation as a term is not just voting. It's an umbrella term for multiple ways of getting involved in politics. So, like, joining a party, or joining a pressure group, or even emailing your MP, or going to like an MP meetup.
Yeah, a good example of this is Maya's older sister.
Yeah.
She emailed their local MP and said, I think you should build a Starbucks.
Yeah, because there was a pub being like knocked down,
Demolished, yeah.
so Iona was like, we need a Starbucks, and now we've got a Starbucks
And now
and
there's
a
a Starbucks
KFC.
there and a KFC.
So look at us
Double
go.
whammy. Didn't even ask for that.
Yeah.
Got it for free. But talking about elections, so like electoral participation, also known as turnout, just after World War II, it was consistently above 75% of people would turn out to vote, because everyone was really politically motivated after World War II. They obviously wanted to, they've just been in a massive war. They wanted to have a say in how the country was run.
Yeah.
The atrocities that Hitler created, and he was elected. Obviously, everyone wanted to have their say in who's going to be running the country.
Yeah.
But now it's around 65%. I mean, it's still a majority, but it is quite a low majority, especially considering it used to be 75 plus.
Yeah, and that majority consists of mainly just like male pale stale voters.
Yeah.
And because they're the people who go out and vote, whereas like younger people or working class people.
18 to 24-year-olds, less than 50% of those vote. Poor or DE voters is what they're like technically classed at. A lot less likely. Ethnic minorities are a lot less likely to turn out and vote.
So if you're doing CAGE analysis, which is class, age, gender, ethnicity, you can use that for like 3 paragraphs on like participation, or like link it.
Although in 2001 we had the lowest turnout of an election ever, or like a general election even, and it was 59.4% of people turned out. Although a lot of people believe this was due to apathy because it was right in the middle of Tony Blair's run in government, and a lot of people were happy with how he was running the country. He was a good leader. Everyone was content basically, so they didn't feel the need to turn out and vote to try and change it.
Yeah.
Because when people want to change up the government, a lot of people turn out to vote because they're like, we need to get this government out.
Yeah.
So, as a prediction, the next general election, I expect to see a higher turnout
Yeah.
than 65%. I expect it to be around 70%.
Sorry, guys. Then in second order elections, which is like the kind of to do with devolution, which is like Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So Scotland's vote only goes like consistently just over 50%, and Wales has never even had 50%. Like it's consistently under 50% like of the people participate. And I suppose you could argue, given that there are more sheep than people in Wales, shouldn't sheep have the vote?
But then obviously the parties would have to extend their
Yeah.
policies to sheep, and it's like, where would it end?
I know.
Because what if you had a really like right-wing party that was like, kill all the sheep, and the sheep don't know what they're voting for?
Exactly.
So, you know, could be tricky, because I'm sure they might follow like the populist opinions.
Yeah.
If they just
They'd
go,
probably
bah,
They'd
Then
just
they might
probably
vote for
be
them.
sheep and
Yeah.
follow each other. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
They'd literally be a sheep.
Then party membership. So it was it was much higher at the end of World War II. Conservatives had 2 million, nearly 3 million members, and Labour had like 1 million members. But it's been on a steady decline because you might argue it's like people are disillusioned with parties, like they don't understand what parties stand for. Like currently Labour, like Keir Starmer, hasn't
is very
like
similar to Rishi Sunak.
Yeah,
He
like-
kind of just magpies ideas,
Yeah.
and it's like
he hasn't
you are
even
meant to be-
talked about like raising taxes
No.
or lowering taxes for
what
anyone.
is like historically very Labour.
Yeah.
He's not covered it, and it's like the parties are becoming a lot more similar ideologically.
Yeah.
But obviously, to explain kind of what party membership is, if you drive around, I'm sure you'll see like a Conservative club or a Labour club. That's basically like, they used to kind of be pubs.
Yeah.
So if you join a party, it was like the big incentive of, you could go to like, say, your local Conservative club. If you join the Conservative, like, you become a member of the Conservative Party basically, and you get like really cheap beers and stuff. But obviously you could also argue that because of like changing attitudes and like modernisation, a lot of young people don't want to go out to pubs, and they're
Yeah.
kind of failing, and it is only the like old 65 plus
Yeah.
older demographics that do have that interest in like going out to the
Yeah.
pub, and you know, because you can just go Tesco's and buy
Yeah.
a pack of beer, and
And especially because like with the growth of technology, even like old people are remaining and it's difficult to join a party online. It's very much complicated, and some
Yeah.
of them you have to pay for them. So, do you want to do that one?
yeah. So did you mention pressure groups?
Yeah.
I was mentioning. So a lot of people, so like there's an evaluation, if you're doing this in like a big paragraph, this is one of my favourite evaluations. Obviously, if there's like the question on it, sorry, I can't speak. Do we have a participation crisis? The argument of yes is party membership is in decline, you know, it's not great. But then, as an evaluation, a lot of people are joining pressure groups such as Black Lives Matter, such as Just Stop Oil, such as like Greenpeace, not to be
Yeah.
confused with the Green Party.
Extinction Rebellion.
Extinction Rebellion. So they're like the new modern form of party memberships, because they're a collective that have a similar set of beliefs or like ideologies, and they're like fighting for what they want. So it's
Yeah.
basically the new party membership. And a lot of people could see that as like plutocratic revenge, because they're not taking part in the like formal, recognised participation. They're kind of going off and creating their own forms of participation, because, you know, a lot of people believes that like politics and politicians only kind of stand for big businesses that donate loads and loads of money to like their
Yeah.
campaigns, and not actually the people. So famously, David Cameron said, you know, you can come and have a dinner with me at 10 Downing Street, but to do it, it was like £100,000, and it's like no ordinary person's going to be able to pay that. It's
Yeah.
going to be a very big business owner's CEO that's going to go, listen, mate, if you lower your taxes a little bit, I'll donate even more money to you.
Yeah.
So it's very corrupt, which, you know, is also mirrored in like Panama scandals and, you know, just expensive scandals in general. They're always coming out.
Yeah.
It's always there. that
Politicians just taking advantage of like what they can claim back. So voter volatility is like, kind of like, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I don't really know either, to be honest.
It's
very good.
just on the PowerPoint.
It is just on the PowerPoint. I just copied it off my book.
We've got partisan de-alignment, which is when people don't have an affiliation with any party.
It's
so
obviously
like,
similar to like the disillusion. They don't know what party they stand for. It's like because they're becoming de-aligned.
Yeah.
All of like the parties don't. You know, Labour was historically very left-wing, conservative, very
like working class for the people, but now it's like, it's not. Then people are often uneducated, so they vote for short-term interests, like the charisma of a candidate. Like, who would you rather go down to the pub with and have a drink? Like,
very famously
yeah,
the 2019 election.
Like, Boris Johnson made a big effort to look like a great guy, like zipline with Union Jack flags and like vegan sausage roll.
You'll have a beautiful new blue
yeah.
passport.
So
you know,
whereas like Jeremy Corbyn was just seen as this old guy who couldn't put his glasses on right.
Yeah, put his glasses
on.
But
his like the difference between the manifestos was Jeremy Corbyn's policies were so good, but because Brexit was the big thing and he kind of avoided talking about it, whereas Boris Johnson was like, get Brexit done, which is kind of like swayed rather than the long-term effects. Like,
yeah, a lot of people thought Jeremy Corbyn's policies on Brexit were really like wishy-washy and not straight to the point. So like his famously was, after 6 months we'll hold another referendum on if people still want to leave. And he like labelled it the final say, but a lot of people thought the final say was said when they held the first referendum.
Yeah.
Like, the people want what the people want. And obviously, famously, Boris Johnson was get Brexit done. Which a lot of people was like, yes, that's my Bojo, that's my Prime Minister.
Yeah. And then also people have no trust in politicians. Like, if they're just like doing it for the big businesses and not for the people, it's kind of like, why would you vote? Like, why would you want to put yourself through, I don't know, like actually voting for someone rather than just
not voting?
Yeah.
But it's like, if you want to make a statement, so you don't want to vote for any of the parties, either vote for like the joke parties, like the monster loony people, forgot their full party name, or just spoil your ballot. Go in there, scribble on your ballot paper, because they count it as, okay, so these are many of the people who've turned out, but only this many people have actually voted.
Yeah.
So they see that number, whereas if you just don't show up to vote, they're like, well, they just don't care, you know, they're just lazy. New Right would say underclass people, like just lazy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you actually turn out to vote, but just don't actually vote, then they have to kind of go, right, well, we kind of need to do something about people not caring about politics anymore.
So, big question of this part of the podcast is, do we have a participation crisis? So, an argument for yes is low turnout, especially within safe seats. So, Oldham Western Royton, for example, has been historically consistently been Labour. So if you're a Conservative voter in Oldham Western Royton, like, you've got a quote-unquote wasted vote because it's a safe seat. Like,
Labour's never not won.
Yeah, you've basically guaranteed Labour's going to win because it's, like, a working-class northern area.
Although, for an argument against is in referendums, so in the Scottish like independence referendum, there was 84% turnout. And then also in the should we leave or remain in the EU, there was 72% turnout, which obviously shows a lot of people actually are interested in politics. You know, there being very high numbers.
And then in 2001, it was low turnout in the Tony Blair election, which is kind of, as we said, due to apathy, but the winning party was known. So, like, it was... I can't remember what I was going to say. And also in second order elections, which is, if you've forgotten already, which I almost did, it's like Scottish
Yeah.
and
So
Welsh.
not general elections,
Yeah.
basically. It's like mayoral elections,
Yeah.
like the devoluted elections.
Then they only have like 30% turnout, even like in Scotland with the 16 and 17-year-old vote. It's very much low turnout in second order elections like that.
However, demographics such as like 65 plus and AB voters, which is like the working middle class, the like office workers, the doctors, the lawyers of the world, they turn out and vote in hordes of people. Like imagine a massive zombie horde.
Oh.
That is 65 plus AB voters right there.
Yeah, especially old people, because they realistically don't have a lot to do.
What do they do all day?
And they're obviously historically going to vote Conservative. So if you I know Jim McMahon was promoting 16 and 17-year-old votes, but Conservative blocked it because they know that if young people get to vote, they're statistically going to vote for Labour and not Conservative.
Because Conservatives have always like backed old people, so they have they want to like raise pensions and inheritance tax. They're going to keep it like 0, whereas Labour are like, old people really aren't that special.
Yeah.
But obviously, Conservatives cover old people a lot, so they're always going to vote Conservative.
Then we have party membership and voter volatility, which is on the decline, as we've like spoken about. Like party membership is very much decreasing. And a lot of people are alienated from politicians. Politicians are actually alienated from the public. Because they just don't relate. They've never been in our shoes.
Famously, David Cameron said, "We're all in this together," and it was like, no, all of the public are in it together, and all of you politicians are in it together, because like Thatcher said, Blair was her biggest legacy in politics, and he was famously the exact opposite party. Like he was New Labour. He was like, oh, let's do all of this new stuff. But it's all kind of just a ploy to get people to elect them.
Like the Panama expenses scandals, where it was like a bunch of MPs, like Conservative and Labour, and Tony Blair, who is part of Labour, but they were all caught up in these expensive scandals, and like they were like not paying tax or something like that. Yeah. And it's like,
all hiding money in offshore accounts and stuff. Yeah. Can we trust in our politicians?
Yeah.
Not really. Although, obviously, with like, well, we covered a bit with like pressure groups and social campaigns. Like famously, YouTuber from Beta Squad, Nicola Milana, ran for London Mayor, and he's been the only independent only independent person to ever get into the top 5 of people in the mayoral vote in London, which is crazy to think that he's literally just a YouTuber.
Yeah.
Like I don't even think he's got like 10 million subs. Like,
and imagine how many more votes he would have got if 16 and 17-year-olds could vote.
Because I'm sure, a lot of his audience is like 16 to 24.
And given that it was 18 plus, like there are adults who are also, well, they might have just done it for their kids' sake. Cause, but that's another point. Like people just vote like from populist views.
Yeah.
Like people don't think because they're not educated in politics. And a lot of people, like apathy, they're not bothered in real change. Like even though a lot of people who voted on Brexit were like, oh, I just want a different, like I just want a little switch up.
Yeah, I just want to experience something new.
There wasn't enough education on Brexit. Like sometimes I'm just like, what even is Brexit?
Yeah, like what was meant to be.
Yeah.
Like what was meant to be achieved through Brexit. Like what did the people think they were achieving?
Yeah.
Like harsh immigration. We don't get that many immigrants from the European Union. Like we don't get many immigrants from Europe. It's like war-torn countries like Syria, Iraq,
we're literally
Palestine.
in our highest ever amount of immigrants, so arguably it really did not do a lot.
Anyway,
that concludes our podcast.
First episode. Tune in next Friday. Make sure you go down, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're updated. Also, all timetable of things. So, this in 4 more episodes' time, in 4 weeks' time, we'll have 2 guests on who have conflicting views to mine and Maya's. So that'll be quite interesting. We'll be talking about what's going on recently, like what everyone thinks. That should hopefully be up before Christmas.
I think it'll be filmed as well, so it'll be on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, you'll see our faces, face reveal. So make sure you are tuned in for that. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.